We at the National Aeronautics and Space Administration are taking the next steps towards interspecies communication. That's why here on St. Thomas in the U.S. Virgin Islands, we have a team of researchers working around the clock to attempt to communicate with dolphins. Let's check in on them. Oh, for the love of all that is holy, what are you doing to that fish? Technically, he's a mammal.
So yeah, we're going to talk about that. I'm King Trout. Buckle up, kiddos. This one gets weird. Our story begins with an American research scientist by the name of John C. Lilly. Lilly was a neuroscientist who during the 40s and 50s conducted research on the structure of the human brain and human consciousness. Research which eventually led to him developing the first isolation tank. His fascination with the human brain expanded into a fascination with cetacean brains, cetacean being a family of sea-dwelling mammals, like dolphins, whales, and porpoises. You know, the kinds of sea-dwelling mammals that 5th graders and people who are no fun at parties like to inform you aren't fish. His fascination stemmed from the fact that these mammals have brains which are in most cases larger than human brains and appear to be as complex, if not more complex, than the human brain. And based on the observations that these cetaceans have such large and complex brains, Lilly made it his goal to develop communication between humans and cetaceans. He founded what he called the Cetacean Nation. Cute. In an effort to, first, develop communication between human beings and cetaceans, and then, second, allow these cetaceans to openly communicate politically as a nation with the rest of the world. His logic being that such complex creatures should also have access to human rights. The same set of rights, anyway. He wanted the Cetacean Nation to be an active member of the United Nations. I'm serious. Now, obviously, none of this would be possible unless we could develop a way to communicate with the cetaceans, so he had to start there. He began his attempts to communicate with cetaceans, primarily dolphins, through the 1950s. Until in 1959, he founded the Communications Research Institute and built a facility on St. Thomas Island in the U.S. Virgin Islands. With all of his focus on dolphin-based communications, he really kicked things into high gear. How could he afford to do this? Well, the United States Navy and NASA were cutting him a check. But why? Aliens. I'm dead serious. I told you this one gets fucking weird. In 1960, astronomer Frank Drake and Carl Sagan got together and developed what they called the Drake equation. This was an equation to determine the likelihood that life exists off of planet Earth. And it turns out the odds are pretty fucking high. Now, this meeting was considered by many to be the first official step towards SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. Now, NASA obviously was very interested in the possibility of extraterrestrial life existing, as was the US Navy in case we have to kill them.
Welcome to Earth.
So, research began in earnest. But then Drake and Sagan realized one small issue. If we did encounter extraterrestrial life, how the hell were we going to talk to them? Sagan had heard of Lilly and figured, hey, if this guy can figure out a way to talk to dolphins, he could probably figure out a way to talk to aliens.
I'm saying to Snowflake, and he is saying,
So NASA and the US Navy began research funding for Lilly's little dolphin experiment. In his attempts to communicate with dolphins prior to the funding from NASA and the Navy, Lilly had noticed that the dolphins he was working with would breach the surface of the water and attempt to mimic the sounds of human speech. This is noteworthy because in the wild, dolphins very rarely breach the surface of the water to communicate. After a few years of construction, the research center was finished, and Lilly began his experiments primarily on 3 dolphins. At this same time, a native of St. Thomas Island by the name of Margaret Howe heard about this top-secret research facility from her brother, apparently, who had no connection to the research facility whatsoever. So how he found out about the top-secret dolphin facility, I don't know. But either way, she loved dolphins, so she went to the facility. She showed up at the research facility with no formal scientific training, but was like, hey guys, I like dolphins, and I heard you have dolphins. Can I come look at them? And they said yes for whatever reason. At this facility, she met Lilly, who was impressed by the gall of her to just show up at his top-secret dolphin facility. They got to talking, and she expressed her fascination ever since childhood with the concept of talking animals. Apparently, she had a very keen eye for the behavior of the dolphins at the facility, so Lilly hired her. She began researching and recording the dolphins' behavior, but she had a request of Lilly. She wanted to get closer to the dolphins. To quote Count Dankula, in the business, we call this foreshadowing. She wanted to spend as much time as was physically possible with the dolphins, so she had a request for Lilly. She asked that the research facility itself be flooded partially with water so that she could live full-time with the dolphins. And Lilly agreed. Lilly was often traveling at this time, so he said, "Yeah, sure, whatever, you can run it." Are you ready for things to get really weird? I hope he said yes, because either way, here we go. In 1964, the Dolphinarium was completed, and Howe moved in with the 3 dolphins. The first floor of the facility had been flooded about waist-deep full of water so that Howe could live amongst the dolphins, while the second story remained dry for her bedroom and office. The 3 dolphins she lived with were Sissy, who she described as pushy and aggressive, real boss bitch energy; Pamela, which is a hilarious name for a dolphin, who she described as shy and kind of cowardly; and Peter, who was an adolescent male, who she quickly became very close to. At this point in the experiments, they had pretty much given up on the concept of humans speaking the dolphin language, which they cutely refer to as Dolphinese, and instead focused their efforts primarily on teaching the dolphins to speak English. This is America. I don't care if you're a sea-dwelling mammal. You live here, you speak American. The process by which Howe was attempting to teach the dolphins English was very similar to the way a human mother teaches an infant to speak English. She would start by teaching them basic phonemes. Or phonemes. Phonemes? She would start by teaching them basic sounds and working her way up to full words and sentences. She also had a strict zero-tolerance policy for any Dolphinese to be spoken during these English lessons. She continued these lessons for a few months, including one method where she painted the bottom half of her face white and put on black lipstick so as to help show the dolphins the movements her mouth was making. Which doesn't make any sense to me. I was like, have you seen a dolphin's mouth? They don't have lips, for starters. She was thinking they would use their blowhole to mimic the sound? I don't know, whatever. She's the dolphin lady. All was well and good until Peter, the adolescent male dolphin, began going through puberty. Now, I'm not your dad, so I'm not going to give you the birds and the bees speech, but with puberty in any mammal come certain urges. And old Peter, he took a liking to Howe. Yeah. Peter would rub up against the inside of Howe's legs, or up against her hand, or her feet. Ugh. And the lessons would be interrupted because of Peter's urges. And at first, Howe would take Peter down to the 2 female dolphins who were waiting in a separate tank during his lessons, but according to her, this became too time-consuming and inconvenient. So she did something else to help relieve Peter's urges. How do I say this in a way that will allow for this video to remain monetized on YouTube? Well, merch linked in the bio below. She was jacking off the fucking dolphin. She was cranking his hog. She was spanking his monkey. She was giving him the old-fashioned under the table at IHOP. And all because it was too inconvenient to move him downstairs to the other dolphins. Yeah, that's a perfectly valid excuse. So yeah, anyway, because of the research for this video, the words dolphin penis are now in my Google search history. Thanks, Margaret Howe. So all that was going on, the research really hadn't been making too much progress, and in the meantime, our boy John Lilly had developed a new fascination. LSD. Lilly would take LSD and sit in his isolation tank for hours, during which he was fully convinced that he was communicating with the dolphins psychically. Since he had developed this psychic connection with the dolphins, obviously the next step was to give the dolphins LSD. Obviously. And as insane as all of this sounds, check this out.
1, 2, 3. Fish in basket.
Obviously, the dolphin's not speaking English, but you can kind of hear it though, can't you? Howe was opposed to the concept of giving the dolphins LSD, but Lilly insisted, and it was his experiment after all. Much to his annoyance though, it didn't seem to have much effect on the dolphins. It only made them quiet, which in an experiment to attempt to communicate with them, not exactly a wonderful result. Eventually, though, Howe did convince Lilly to stop giving LSD to Peter specifically, because obviously she had a very close connection to him. The year was now 1966. Very little progress had been made, and Lilly became more fascinated with LSD than communicating with dolphins. Except for psychically in his isolation tank. He was still doing that regularly. NASA and the Navy, primarily through Dr. Sagan, would regularly check in on the experiments to see how they were doing, and at this point in time, they weren't thrilled. The question was raised as to whether or not Howe was actually teaching the dolphins to speak English or if they were just mimicking human speech, kind of in the same way a parrot does. Just because a parrot repeats what a human says doesn't necessarily imply that we're communicating with them. The lack of results in combination with Lilly being an LSD-fueled loose cannon and the dolphin hand stuff caused NASA and the Navy to cut funding. Due to Lilly's waning interest and the lack of funding, the experiment ended, and Howe went home. Shortly after Howe's departure, Peter unalived himself. Seriously. Since dolphins are mammals that breathe air but live underwater, each breath is a conscious choice. So, on occasion, when a dolphin just isn't feeling like it anymore, they'll take their last breath, float down to the bottom of the water, and not come back. Did Peter do this because his heart was broken? Maybe, but my guess would be it's because he was getting as many HJs a day as he wanted, and all the attention was being paid on him, and then that all abruptly ended. The dolphin from the TV show Flipper actually did the same thing once production on the show ended. Apparently, dolphins are attention whores. In the late 1970s, Hustler magazine found out about these experiments and published an article talking about the relationship between a male dolphin and a female human. Howe, understandably, was horribly embarrassed, worried that the lasting legacy she would have after all of her work would only be the fact that she was doing hand stuff to a male dolphin. Which, fair, but also, just don't do that. Just don't do that. Don't jerk off animals. Don't do that. You could have put him downstairs. I'm sorry it was inconvenient. But don't jerk off animals. Don't do that. Just don't do that. Lilly, throughout the remainder of his life, continued his experiments to communicate with cetaceans, since he was communicating with them psychically when he was on LSD in his isolation tank. And at one point admitted to f***ing a female dolphin. What is it with these people f***ing dolphins? I don't understand. I don't understand. So what's the takeaway? What can we learn from this? Well, first of all, don't do hand stuff to animals. And second of all, our government is so bad at spending money. Holy shit. Holy shit. Federal agencies paid a guy to give LSD to dolphins while a woman jerked off one. Anyway, I've been King Trout, and as always, thank you for watching. Many more videos to come. I'm changing up my schedule, so hopefully you'll be getting a lot more frequently. Also, check out my merch. Follow me on Instagram. Not TikTok, I don't use that. X. Go to kingtroutcomedy.com. Love y'all. Bye.